Kidsgrove, a small town situated in the borough of Newcastle-under-Lyme, Staffordshire. It lies just shy of the Cheshire border. Once upon a time, Kidsgrove were naught but a small confederation of rural communities. In fact, back in day, the area were known as Kid Crew, the word crew being an old English term for pen, style, stall. So it is believed the meaning of the town's name were the place of the stall of the calves. Bit of a mouthful. A strong indication of the area's reliance on farming and other rural practices. However, this were all to change, for in the 18th century, this loose scattering of country villages and hamlets were to be drawn together by the grasping tendrils of industry, more specifically coal mining, and many were the collieries that sprung up in the area, or should I say, plunged deep into the dark regions of our world. Now, in 1770, the renowned engineer James Brindley began construction on what would become known as the Harecastle Tunnel. And this is where our tale begins. The 1.6 mile long tunnel lies upon the Trent Mersey Canal. It is actually one of two tunnels, the second constructed 50 or so years later by Thomas Telford, but I digress. The main purpose of the tunnel were for the transportation of coal from the nearby Golden Hill Colliery to the kilns of the Staffordshire potteries, one industry feeding the fires of another. Construction of the tunnel was completed in 1777, and this is when the troubles began, and the entity that would become known as the Kidsgrove or Kidsgrove Boggart made its presence known. Now, indulge me if you will. Imagine you're an 18th century bargeman travelling through the pitch black of the Harecastle, your barge laden with tons of coal. There's no towpath, no horse to draw you, so you're forced to leg your way through the tunnel. An arduous process where you place your feet up on the tunnel's wall and more or less walk your way through. It's slow going. The muscles in your legs are aflame with exertion. The only thing to guide your way, the slowly growing pinprick of light at t'other end of the tunnel. Nearly there, you're thinking, nearly there. Few more steps, just a few more steps, and we're out. But then you hear summit, a faint, keening that slowly rises into the distinct sound of a whale. It's not happening, you tell yourself, it's just the wind, blowing fierce through the tunnel. You keep your head down, quicken your pace, a few more steps, a few more steps. But the anguished cry grows, seems to be getting closer. It's near oppressive, ringing in your head like some terrible bell. You don't want to look, but you can't help it. Glancing round your spy summit, the distinct form of a woman suspended in mid-air, drifting ever closer to your barge, that infernal keening getting louder and louder and louder. But where does it come from, you wonder? For to your horror, you see this woman. She has no head, just a bloody stump that still seems to bleed, the gore dripping down what remains of her neck. You scrunch your eyes shut and leg faster, the soles of your feet pounding on the walls. The dreadful noise fades, and mercifully you reach the end of the tunnel and the cold light of day, forever changed by what you just seen. You try and put it out of your mind, but you can't, for that terrible vision is seared into your memory. After you drop off your cargo, you make your way to the nearest tavern, an ale to drown the trauma. But there'd be no comfort in ale or good company. For you see, there'd be whispers, rumblings and dark chatter. An explosion, they say. 91 dead at Talk of the Hill Colliery. They seen her before it happened, drifting through the mine. Her with no head, the boggart. I know. Sounds far-fetched, doesn't it? But back in them days, the fear of the boggart were very real, as its appearance always seemed to presage some great calamity. An article in the Sentinel, published on December 6, 1879, gives some insight into the malign influence this spectre had on the community. It reads thus: So alarmed did the colliers become at what was supposed to be its first appearance, that there was great difficulty in getting them to work, and on the least unusual noise occurring, or let one of their number report that he had seen something, and work was at once suspended for the day, and sometimes for a longer period. And the news went round every cottage household, with the usual results, that the boggart had been seen. Ominous words for sure, but where did this boggart come from? What are the origins of this fearful phantasm? Well, as is the nature of such tales, accounts differ. But at the time, the most widely believed story was that a boatman murdered his wife whilst travelling to London via the Trent Mersey. On entering the Aircastle tunnel, a quarrel had arisen between the couple, and after some provoking words, the enraged bargeman picked up a sharp piece of slate and there proceeded to hack his wife's head off. To say he had communication issues would probably be an understatement, but anyway, after committing this grisly act, he dragged her body into a culvert known as Gilbert's Hole in an attempt to conceal his crime. The body was later discovered by mine workers. It is said that not long after the discovery of the body, appearances of the headless apparition began, always before some accident or tragedy. Another account says that the boggart is in fact the spirit of a collier who was decapitated in a tragic accident. But alas, there are no records of either of these events occurring. Both amount to little more than hearsay and rumour. However, it would be remiss of me not to mention the murder of Christina Collins. Very real crime that over the years has become muddled up with the boggart myth. At around 5 a.m. on June 17, 1839, boatmen discovered the lifeless body of a woman floating face down in the Trent Mersey Canal at Brindley Bank near Rugeley. The body was identified as Christina Collins, a 36-year-old dressmaker from Liverpool. She had been travelling by barge to London to meet her husband Robert, an hostler who had left Liverpool to find work in the capital. She was the only passenger on the barge, captained by a Mr. James Owen, and manned by two men, Mr. George Thomas and Mr. William Alice, and a boy, William Muston. The horse-drawn barge reached Stoke Wharf around midday on Sunday. During the journey, Christina had been quite vocal in regards to the crew's behaviour, as they had apparently been drinking constantly since the journey commenced. By the time the boat reached Sandon Lock, the crew were all drunk to the point of idiocy. Christina was still alive by the time the boat reached Corwich Lock, where the boy Muston got off to lead the horse along the towpath. When he returned to the boat, Christina were gone. No doubt the poor lad were told to keep his mouth shut and not ask any questions, and the boat continued on its way. The crew were arrested shortly after the discovery of Christina's body, and charged with murder and rape. Following the investigation, the boy Muston was found to have had no part in Christina's murder, and all charges against him were dropped. The rest of the crew, Owen, Thomas and Alice, were then cleared of the charge of rape during a trial at Stafford Assizes, but all three men were found guilty of murder and sentenced to death. Mr. William Ellis was reprieved at the last minute, however. Owen and Thomas were executed by hanging at Stafford Jail on April the 11th, 1840, in front of a crowd of nearly 10,000 people. Justice had been served. It's understandable that the tragedy of Christina's murder will get mixed up in the legend of the Boggart. There is, after all, an uncanny resemblance to the tale of the boatman's wife. I suppose it's the nature of folklore that truths get drawn into fiction, for is not folklore just history, remembered differently? Yet it seems the legend still persists. It would also seem the Boggart's activities were not only confined to the Aircastle tunnel, as an account by a one Mrs. Napier would suggest. The incident occurred at the nearby Clough Hall estate. Mrs. Napier was tending to the rose garden when she observed a woman approaching her, who seemed to be walking among the flower beds. Mrs. Napier remarked that as the woman got closer, she experienced a feeling of overwhelming sadness that quickly turned to horror when she realised the woman in fact was headless. She watched dumbstruck as the woman walked through the hedge surrounding the garden, noting as she faded from view that she wore clothes of a different generation. One has to wonder if the appearance of the Boggart at Clough Hall was an omen of the estate's demise, as not long after, the once proud hall fell into disuse and was later demolished. Or maybe it's just a coincidence. Who knows? But I'll tell you what is known. The legacy of the Boggart still looms large in the imaginations of the folk of Staffordshire, all in spite of the fact that the Brindley Tunnel, the place where the Boggart first manifested, has been closed now for over a century. Yet, the Talford Tunnel still remains, and to this day, children are told to close their eyes and be very quiet as they pass through the darkness of the Talford, lest they draw the Boggart's headless gaze. So here, if ever you find yourself on a canal pleasure cruise down the Trent Mersey, and you find yourself passing through the Aircastle tunnel, be on your guard, for the Boggart may well be in residence. Have a good 'un. I'll be seeing you